There is probably no person who does not know about people who are able to see events of the distant past and look into the future. Such people are called clairvoyants. They are known to use various objects in their work. For example, some clairvoyants on one photo or a personal item of a person can assess the health of this person, tell about his past and future. Such a fact in his time was interested in geologist and popularizer of science Rudolf Balandin. The scientist suggested that in spite of the fact that clairvoyants in their work use different techniques to obtain the necessary information, at the same time they resort to the same source. What is this source? Rudolf Balandin tried to answer this question in one of his works. How to reconstruct the events of the past, of which so few traces remain. To begin with a striking story that took place in the 18th century. It was described by the Abbé de Vaillemorn. On the 5th of June 1693, late in the evening, the bodies of a wealthy merchant and his wife were discovered in a house in Lyons. Their house had been ransacked. Since none of the neighbors had seen or heard anything strange that day, the investigators found themselves in a quandary. It was decided to enlist the help of Jacques Aymard. He was an ordinary peasant who lived near Lyon. It was rumored that Jacques Aymard could find the culprit with the help of a walnut branch, a story that Rudolf Balandin recalled. The Crown prosecutor authorized Aymard to participate in the investigation of the case. To begin with, Aymard examined the house where the tragedy had occurred. In his hands, the peasant was holding 2 branches of a walnut twig. When he went down into the cellar, the branch bent slightly towards the very spot where the merchant and his wife had been found. Aymard then surveyed the bank of the river on which the trader's house stood. On his way, the peasant noticed the gardener's house. He went inside. Aymard walked around the house from room to room. As he approached the dining table, each time a walnut branch near it began to sway downwards. At this table sat the man who massacred the merchant and his wife, Aymard announced to his attendants. The gardener and his wife were questioned. They assured that there had been no guests in their house the night before. The gardener's children told the same story as their parents. However, the investigator noticed that the occupants of the house were agitated about something. Eventually, they confessed that 3 travelers had knocked on their door the night before. When the gardener let them in, they took the dinner that was intended for the gardener's family. When they sat down at the table, the guests did not leave a single crumb behind. They ordered the owners of the house to keep silent about what had happened and then left. The gardener said that one of the late guests had a hump on his back. For several days Aymard wandered the streets of Lyon. In one tavern he also managed to pick up the trail of the criminals. Then his search led him to a fairground. Not far from this place was a prison. The investigator suggested that the peasant check all the prisoners who had been brought here in the last few days. Aymard walked several times near the lined-up prisoners. The nut bar pointed to one of them. This man had ended up in jail this morning for some kind of pickpocketing. And this prisoner was hunched over. Later, the gardener recognized in him the very late visitor. The story told by the Abbé de Vaillemorn has had various explanations. In the last century, the French scientist Henri Mage presented such a version, the walnut twig, which, it would seem, in this case played a major role, in fact, little help. The fact is that Jacques Aymard was a clairvoyant. Rudolf Balandin agreed with this conclusion of the scientist. However, Henri Mage did not specify how the clairvoyant managed to restore the events of the past, which left so few traces. This can be explained by the existence of the information field of the universe. Thus, we have already determined that biolocation is just a way of activating the spiritual capabilities of a person to achieve certain goals. The only question that remains to be answered is how the radiation, of which de Vailmont spoke, can preserve the memory of past events, and not only of them. In some cases, clairvoyants who use frames and vines, apparently, manage to look into the future, notes Rudolf Balandin. According to the scientist, this is evidenced by an experiment conducted by a scientist experimenter Alexander Plushnikov in late 1979. He sailed on the ships Karelia, and with the help of the frame determined the oncoming ships, which were still behind the horizon. The experiment was conducted at night. The information provided by Alexander Plushnikov was confirmed by the information received with the help of the radar station. How did the experimenter manage to know that some ship was just preparing to appear in the field of vision of the crew of the ships Karelia? According to Rudolf Balandin, it can be explained by the existence of the information field of the universe. Rudolf Balandin noted that to date there is no universally accepted idea of the information field. Candidate of geological and mineralogical sciences Nikolai Sochevanov discussed this topic in detail. The basis of our universe is energy, motion, and matter. These three components were connected by the famous formula of Albert Einstein. However, it did not take into account another part, without which the other named parts are meaningless. It is about information. Energy, matter, motion are connected with these or those objects that contain a complex of information, explains Rudolf Balandin. It turns out that any event, even an insignificant one, leaves some kind of memory. For example, the Earth's crust contains all the information about the Earth's past. Of course, the information about certain objects and events preserved in the crust differently. From some inhabitants, who walked on our planet thousands and thousands of years ago, prints were preserved, and from others only particles of organic matter. Some objects have turned to dust. But it is also a form of memory. One can talk endlessly about the types and essence of information contained in the objects and phenomena of our world. But let's return to Sochevanov's hypothesis. He proposed to consider the totality of events accompanying the history of the universe as a kind of information field. And if it contains all the information about the present and the past of the universe, it is logical to include the future. Does it mean that future events are predetermined? And that the universe is a kind of crystal frozen for centuries, in which all space-time of all past and future objects and phenomena is enclosed? But if the universe represented such a frozen crystal with all events of the past and future, then there should be no mistakes in the predictions of clairvoyants about the coming events. And they often do. This indicates that the future is not predetermined to the end, convinced Balandin. According to Rudolf Balandin, clairvoyants see different variants of events that can happen with a certain degree of probability. Which variant will become reality depends on the past and is determined by it. Rudolf Balandin believes that all variants of events should be contained in the information field of the universe. There is a version that psychics use the information field of the universe to achieve their goals. To get access to it, they resort to a variety of ways. Someone tries to get information with the help of a vine or a frame, and someone uses photos and other objects. It is known that the Bulgarian soothsayer Vonga asked her guests to take a sugar cube with them. By taking it in her hands, she apparently received information about the person. Probably, all these objects are not sources of information themselves, but are a means of receiving it from the information field of the universe, Rudolf Balandin suggested.